welcome to the conversation, Warren. I'm glad you made the time. I'm really appreciative.
It's
It's nice to hang out with
great to
you.
be with you. I'm looking forward to talking.
So I feel like one of the quotes I try to remember is it's a line from David White where he says, "Start close in." And I decided to take the last question I was going to ask you and just make it the first question. And
Okay.
that question was like, what questions are you sitting with right now? What are the questions that you're carrying around with you these days?
Well, right now I'm in a transition period from my previous book and my previous area of obsession to a new area of obsession. So that's so what I'm working on, the questions I'm dealing with now have to do with, I'm thinking a lot about nature and how nature affects our creativity. I'm thinking a lot about how creativity is under assault from our digital environment. And it's really, I think, having a profound effect on people and their ability to spend time thinking and focusing and being creative. I think it's having a big effect. We're probably just seeing the beginnings of it, but
Yeah.
it's going to be a change. And so I'm thinking about how that is affecting people and what people may need to do differently in order to ensure to protect their creativity and to strengthen it.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be those are the questions I'm kind of focused on now.
And I feel like creativity has been a question for you for a while. Because when I think about,
my whole career,
your previous work.
Yeah, my whole career has
about
been about creativity. Yeah, and in various forms. It's gone through different stages. I started. You may know this, but I started as a journalist in the advertising field, and
that part I didn't know.
Yeah, like Adweek, Ad Age, and writing about advertising. And I staked out the creative part of the business. I didn't care at all about the business part or the agency mergers or any of that kind of stuff. I cared about the creative departments within ad agencies and the ad agencies that were most creative within the industry. So I would be writing about the Wyden and Kennedy and Goodby Silverstein, and these were the agencies that were doing the best commercials, the best ads. So that was my initial focus with creativity, and then I moved into writing about design, and again creativity, and I was writing about design thinking and how designers basically solve problems and create. And then I moved from there into the questioning books, which again are largely about creativity because they're about how you start with questions, and the questions you ask can sort of propel your creativity and your innovation and that kind of thing. So it's always been about, in one form or another, it's always been about creativity.
It's funny. I appreciate you mentioning design thinking because I feel like, it's been declared dead so many times. And I also feel like anytime someone discovers it, it is reborn because there's this moment. I've seen it so many times where somebody says, "Oh my God, there's a method for creating things that matter, that are going to resonate with people, and it lights them up and it sparks them." And I think some of it comes from this idea of there are phases, and I should be thinking or asking different things at different phases.
Well, I was very interested I'm interested in the fact that there are processes for creativity. And design thinking is one of those processes. But you can go all the way back to the 90s, and there was something called the Creative Problem Solving Institute. And I think one of the people involved with it was Alex Osborne, who was from the original BBDO. So anyway, they were, or maybe they were just using his work, I'm not sure. But they were putting forth 5-step processes on how creative people solve problems. And then if you match that up with the design thinking process, which started to surface years later, very similar. And then, so I took that when I was doing questioning, and I said, well, how can I do a questioning process that reflects what those processes are like? Can I draw from that? And I came up with a 3-step process called why, what if, and how. And basically the idea being that if you look at design thinking or you look at the creative problem-solving formulas of the past, you can boil it down to 3 steps. And the 3 steps are: you have to understand then you have to imagine, and then you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, when you're faced with any kind of a problem, the first thing you have to do is understand the problem. And I match that up with why questions. When you're trying to understand something, you're usually asking why. So, why does this problem exist? Why does it matter? Why is it here? I need to understand
Yeah.
the problem. And then once you understand the problem, you move to imagining possibilities. And so I match that up with what if. When we're trying to use our imagination, we tend to ask what if questions. What if I tried this? What if I tried that? And then the last stage of problem solving is you have to do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you understand the problem, you've imagined some possibilities. Now, how do you make it work? What do you do? How do you
Yeah.
make the ideas real? And so I match that up obviously with how, right? So
Yeah.
so to me, creativity is all about asking why, then asking what if, and then asking how. And when I would look at different innovation stories, I could trace most of the time. I could say, oh yeah, okay, I can see this was the why stage where they
Mm-hmm.
started. And usually it was with a person asking why. The inventor of the Polaroid cameras asking, why hasn't somebody? And so you can take almost any invention story and it starts with somebody asking why.
Yeah.
But then they have to use their imagination, and that's the what if stage, and then they have to actually prototype it, build it, make it real, and that's the how stage. But
Yeah.
anyway, all of those things are related, design thinking, questioning, problem solving. And it all goes back to maybe, the invention of the wheel. And I'm sure when, they had to understand the
Mm-hmm.
problem. Why do we need a wheel? Okay, this is why we need it. And then they had to say, well, what if we have the thing be round? Well, let's try that. And then they have to build the wheel.
Yeah.
So, to me, it's a universal process that goes back to, the beginning of time.
So, I mean, there's so many threads that I want to pull out. And one of the things that I've been thinking about was while I was reading this book is like, I know you spent years going into organizations and talking about this
Yeah.
work. And
Hmm.
I think one of the questions I've been sitting with for a couple of years is how does change inside of organizations really happen or
Mm.
not?
Right.
And I think one of the challenges I imagine is there are some organizations that you go into and you talk to them about the power of questions,
Yeah.
and you maybe even teach them the question formulation technique.
Hmm.
You inspire them to think about beautiful questions and
Right.
to look at the architecture of innovation as a series of questionings. And
Yeah.
I too am a huge nerd, and I get passionate about the idea that like there is a series of questions I can ask
Right.
myself, and I
Yep.
can shift gears and bring myself and a team through that.
Right.
And I also know that sometimes when we leave, some organizations take things up and some
Mm.
don't.
Yeah.
And this is sort of maybe separate from the questioning
Yeah.
question, but like, what do you think actually separates organizations that learn to make questioning part of their
Mm.
DNA and those that just sort of like go back to the way
Yeah.
they were doing things
I think
before?
it depends on whether they're really a learning organization or not.
No.
I mean, there are some organizations that are geared to learn, and it's in their DNA, and it's in their leadership, and it's in their methodology.
Yeah.
So it's all part of the system, and the system says if we're going to succeed, we're going to have to constantly be evolving, adapting, and learning, and taking in new information and trying new things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think startups tend to be better at that because they are still,
Yeah.
they started by innovating and, breaking the rules and doing things differently. And so they're used to it, and they're comfortable with it, and so they're better at taking in new information, new, and they're willing
Yeah.
to try it out, and they'll say, hey, let's try this next week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Older organizations or more established bureaucratic organizations, they have trouble with that because they've got really ingrained processes and ways of doing things. And so,
Mm-hmm.
where is this? You're bringing some new thing in, and they have to figure out where does this fit in our
Yeah.
whole system, which we don't change that often. And how are we going to do this thing, this different thing? So I find, a lot of organizations They
Mm.
listen, they like the idea, they see
Mm-hmm.
something there, but they really don't know where to put it. They don't know how to enact it and how to get
Yeah.
it as part of the process. And they could do that if they wanted to, and very rarely they do, but they'd have to put someone in charge of it.
Mm.
They'd almost have to create a department for it,
A chief questionologist,
Yeah, they
if
would.
you
And
would.
I say that when I go, I said, look, if you really want this to work, you would have to take someone here and put them in charge of it. Whoever's the nerdiest about it, whoever comes to
Mm-hmm.
you and says, wow, I love that presentation, they can be your chief questionologist. It's not like they need special
Yeah.
training. They don't. They just need the passion for it, and then they could be the person that leads that effort. But if you
Yeah.
don't put someone on it, it won't go anywhere. Like it'll
Yeah.
just be, as soon as the speaker leaves, the idea goes away, basically.
Yes. I appreciate you highlighting the idea of being a learning organization, because I think recently I was working with a team where the main homework I gave them was at the end of their big leadership team meeting that they're having every week is to carve out some time to say, how was that meeting?
Right, right.
We wanted to make things different. Like, what was good about it? What wasn't good?
Yeah,
What are things that are emerging? And in your book, you talk about the enemies of questioning, it's a great list: fear, knowledge, or the
right.
illusion of knowledge,
Yeah,
which is, I guess, is hubris,
right, right. It
the idea
is.
that I have.
Yep.
So fear,
Yeah,
knowledge, bias,
yeah,
hubris, and time. And I
yeah,
think, when you use that term, the digital assault, I think about one of my favorite phrases, which is the tyranny of urgency. There's this idea
yeah.
that we just don't have time for anything.
Right.
And questions do take
Yeah,
time,
they slow things down. Yeah,
and they slow things down, which I feel like. So I want to talk about the new experiment, and we're almost at the halfway point. So I think we should shift gears in just a second. But
yeah.
I first want to dig into, I was flipping through the book, and I don't know, I stumbled on this question that I just used
Mm.
because it blew me away, Warren. And I just want to say thank you for the question. How might we form a stronger partnership?
Oh, okay.
And I think it's a really wild question. And
Yeah, yeah,
I want to talk a little bit about the question formulation technique, but also like your addendum to it, because you use words like sharpen, soften,
right.
neutralize to
Yeah,
make a question more beautiful, however
yeah,
we would define beauty. What I think so interesting about that question is that it's asking a question, but it's also telling somebody something.
right.
It's actually broadcasting, well, I would like to have a stronger
Yeah,
partnership.
yeah, yeah. Right, right.
And so I feel like sometimes I think about this ask tell tension that
Yeah,
Ed Schein tells us about. And it's like, yeah, we should be asking more and
yeah,
telling, less as a leader, certainly. But I think it's such an interesting, because a question has a dialectic. It frames
yeah.
things differently.
Well,
And it's not saying like, yeah, sorry, I could,
the word there that's really also really powerful is the word might,
right.
which is the secret sauce behind how might we questions. And the reason why it works is just because instead of saying how should we or how can we,
Yeah.
how might we is a very expansive word. It opens up possibilities. It basically, when you're saying might, you're saying, well, there's no one way to do
Mm,
this. Anything is possible, and there's a lot we could try. And because we're saying how might we, it means
mm-hmm.
we can do anything. And then as far as the idea of the partnership, and I like to use the term collaborative inquiry,
Mm,
which to me means you are working on questions together with other people. So when you say to someone, how might we form a better partnership? You're using collaborative inquiry there. You're putting a question there that's all about working together on that
mm-hmm.
question. So the collaboration or the partnership could begin with answering that question. I mean, that
Yeah.
question has to be answered as a partnership. It's like one person can't answer it. Both parties have to answer it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really important, and I always feel, I really like what Daniel Pink, when he did his book about selling. Did you know that book from a few years ago? Daniel Pink did a book, I think it was
Mm-hmm.
called "To Sell is Human,"
Sure.
and one of the main points he talked about was that good salespeople are not on the other side of the desk trying to sell to you. They come over to your side of the desk and
Mm,
they make it about us, and we're doing, instead of me selling to you, we together are trying to solve a problem that maybe your
Yeah.
company's having. And maybe the solution is this product that I'm trying to sell you, but that's not the way we're approaching it. We're approaching it as the two of us together are going to talk about what is the problem and how does it get solved. And if it happens that my product is the solution, great, but I'm not going to try to sell it to you. So I thought that was really profound way to think about selling, and it's a way to think about all kinds of business communication, is like instead of trying to convince somebody of something or sell somebody or browbeat somebody. This is a great lesson for all managers, all business leaders.
Yeah.
If you can turn it into a how might we collaboration, if you're having a problem with one of your people and you can turn it into a collaborative question of how might we together figure out how to solve this problem that you're having. If you can do that, that's such better leadership than going and yelling at the person, how you keep screwing up on that problem. It's so much more effective if you can turn it into a collaborative inquiry exercise.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I've been thinking about this question, reviewing your book of like, what does a beautiful question mean, and how do we know if it's beautiful? And one of the things that I think for me is like, from my background in design, we talk about utility and form following function. There's a beauty of utility when something works
Right.
well. You're like, God,
Yeah.
that's just beautiful, isn't it? And I
Yeah.
think a great question seems to leverage a fundamental understanding of human nature,
Yeah.
which is to say, a question that evokes more from someone, that's going
Yeah.
to create more juice, is
Yeah.
going to be just like, you could
Yeah.
say juicier, you
Right.
could say beautiful.
Right. Right. Yeah. And but you also have to design a question. A question is designed, and you have to design it with the potential pitfalls in mind and all kinds of things. Because there are downsides to questioning.
Yes.
Questions, if they're asked the wrong way, they can be confrontational,
Mm-hmm.
they can be off-putting to people.
Yeah.
Why are you
Yeah.
asking me that? You know, they can look as if you're challenging authority.
Yeah.
So if you're asking someone who's above you in the hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
they might take your question as some type of a challenge to their authority. So there's all kinds of things you have to watch out for. People sometimes ask questions insincerely, where they're one of the things people do a lot is they take criticism and they dress it up as a question. Like what were you thinking when you did that?
How
Um,
did we screw that up so royally? Take
yeah,
me through your
yeah.
process.
So it's like so you have to design if you want to get the maximum effect of questioning, which can be really powerful. You have to design it so that it's well received by people, and that means you have to get rid of a lot of that junk. A lot of
Yeah.
the judgment and the tone that can be sort of confrontational. You have to work on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a complex design project in itself, making a great question.
I love
But
that
it's
you
also
use.
simple at the same time, because if you think about it, kids ask great questions. They ask beautiful questions, and it's not like they're sitting around designing them for 2 days. The question's just
Mm-hmm.
coming out of them. So a
Yes.
great question can be instinctive as well. But I do think as adults, what we should do is maybe a great question comes to mind. Well, spend some time analyzing it, thinking about it. Make sure you've got it worded the right way. Make sure it's got the right tone, and you're asking it the right way at the right time.
I love that you use the word design, because obviously that's, my axe to that I like to grind. Conversations can be designed, and I think if we're designing our questions, to me, the question behind that question is like, well, how do we
Right.
design them? And that's one of the things I liked about these words like soften, sharpen,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Sure.
neutralize. Like, is there a sort of set of heuristics or
No, I don't think
design
so.
principles that
I
you're
think a lot of it
using
is.
these days? It's
I
just
think with
going from the
questioning,
hip.
it's instinct, and it's trial and error, and it's it's thinking about the question and thinking about how you would react if that question was
Mm-hmm.
asked to you. And so that's how you work on questions and shape them. I don't think there's necessarily a formula for it or a methodology. I think that questions are so different, and you're
Mm.
asking them in so many different types of contexts and so many different ways that there is no formula that could apply to all of that. So
Yeah.
the main thing you have to do, to me, is thought. thought has to go into it, right? Oftentimes we ask questions without thinking. We ask questions as soon as they come into our head. We kind of throw them out there. And so I think if you do that, you're going to have a lot of hits and misses. You're going to have some questions that you asked that you shouldn't have asked, or that you asked in the wrong way. So it's simply, to me, a matter of slowing down, treating your questions like the important thing they are. And that means you spend a little time on them and you think about them and you noodle around with them a little bit and try different wording, try different ways of framing the question, and try to think about the tone you're going to ask with that question. There's a really important thing you do with tone and questioning, which is you can just start by saying, I'm curious about something, Daniel. I was wondering about something. Okay, now just by doing that, you soften the question, just by doing that one little thing, because that does all kinds of things. It tells people you're curious, and that's the reason you're asking the question. It gives the person a second to prepare for the fact that a question is coming at them. So it's doing a lot of work, that little phrase of "I'm curious." But there are things like that you can do that will make your questioning more effective.
That's sometimes I frame this as it's like positive hedging. I could get this wrong, but I'm thinking about a couple of things here. Tell me more about blank.
And then if you want to
signposting,
really add on to that, you do what I call the question sandwich, which is like you started with that little preliminary thing. I'm wondering about something, or I may be wrong about this, but that's the beginning. Then you ask the question, and then after you ask the question, you do rationale. So you say, I was wondering about something, Daniel, blah, blah, blah. Here's my question. And the reason I asked you that is because, I've been having some issues at work myself with this thing. So I'm wondering about. So what you're doing now is you're doing the preparation thing up front where you say, I'm curious. Then you're asking the question, and then you're giving rationale just to drive home. There's a good reason why I'm asking you this question. I'm not just asking it out of the blue. It's not a stupid question. It's not a confrontational question. It's based on my needs. I need to know about this question. So that really, by the time you do all three of those things, now the person, there's almost no chance they're going to be offended by your question or put off by it, whatever, because now they really understand, okay, this is really coming out of curiosity. It's really coming from a good place. Therefore, I'm going to really try to answer this question.
And it sounds like you've also given people time to settle into, there's a question being asked. Right. I know why. And they don't feel like they have to answer immediately, which is, seems like it's just creating safety. The thing that I heard, and I think it's just really important to outline this, is that you're paying attention to what you think of the other person's psychology, which is just another way of framing empathy. Right. Like I'm empathetic to the impact this question could have on them, and I'm designing not just the question and the words, but the approach.
Put yourself on the other side of the question, because that's what a lot of people don't do, right? I mean, I've been around and worked with people who are very proud of the fact that they will badger people with questions, right? And they see themselves as almost the devil's advocate of the company or whatever. And that's fine. I mean, you need some of that in a company. You need people who are willing to ask questions. But I think sometimes what those people fail to do is be respectful in their questioning and be mindful of the fact that if you're firing questions at somebody, that's not necessarily the most comfortable position that you're putting them in, right? And so I really want people to put themselves on the other side of that and say, well, how would I react if someone came at me with 5 questions in a row like that? I mean, would I be comfortable with that, or would I be a little put off by that? So, always have that kind of empathy in mind. Yeah.
Design thinking to the bone. So I want to transition to this next project that you're working on and the experiment. And I can share a little bit about my experience with it, but I'd also be sort of curious, like how there was this other question that I found in the book that I just was like, am I willing to kill the butterfly? Which is like this. And I was thinking about like, well, what's Warren's creative process like now? Yeah. And you are a writer, and I'm wondering like how you sort of questioned your way into
Yeah.
this experiment and what question you're trying to answer. We talked a little bit about the assault, the digital assault on creativity,
Yeah.
but maybe you can put it in a little bit more
Well,
context.
so it all started. I went on a trip to Ireland. I went to this amazing place in Ireland called the Burren, which is a great rocky landscape. A lot of artists have gone there in the past and spent time there. It's a very inspirational place, just because it's just beautiful, and it's solitary, it's quiet. And so I went there, and it had a pretty profound effect on me. I felt like I was more creative when I came out of that place. And so then I started looking into the current science on, how places can affect us, how places can affect our creativity. And I discovered there's a whole branch of science that's looking at what nature, when you put yourself out into nature, what it can do to your brain patterns and your ways of thinking. And it can really open up a lot of creative thinking, it turns out. They're sort of discovering this scientifically. So that became the basis of my new work, which is to say, okay, if we know that going out into nature can possibly stimulate creative thoughts, what if we were to try to to try to systematize that, almost to try to make practices out of going out into nature? And what would we do then if we go out into nature? How much time would we spend? And then what would we do after that? Because when you're walking around in nature, you're not necessarily creating anything, right? You're not in a mode to create. You're in a mode to think and to have ideas, but you're not really working,
Mm,
So then I thought, well, there has to be a second part to that equation, which is that you go out into nature and you spend time, and then you go into a closed space and you try to bring to life whatever might have come into your head while you were out in nature. I think of that as the cave. You go into a it could be your office, but I tend to like to pick places that are even more detached than my home office. Like I'll go into a coffee shop and cut myself off with headphones, or
mhm.
I'll go into a library and find a desk in the deepest corner of the library that's the most isolated spot. I'll rent out a motel room. I'll do things like that. And so I want to find these places that are dedicated spaces where I'm just going to work for
Yeah.
hours on end. And so I've developed this as kind of a two-part process of, you go outside, then you go inside. And and that's going to be one of the main things I talk about in my book. I'm going to go through that experiment. My next book, I'm going to go through that experiment lots of times myself. I'm calling it the outside in method, and I'm going to see how it goes and what comes of it. And I'm also going to talk about the kind of places you might want to do this.
Mm,
What are good places both for your outdoor experiences, and then what are good places for your cave experience. And if you're setting up your own cave, how might you want to set it up?
mm,
And so basically that's where I'm at, and that's kind of what I'm working on, and what I'm discovering is it's very good. It works really well for me, and I'm starting to see from results coming in of getting other people to do it. I'm starting to see pretty good results, not 100%. It's some people they're not quite getting it right. It's not quite
mm,
working for them, but for lots of people, it's working really well.
mm,
And what it does for me, all I can say is it gives me focus. It gives me, first of all, the outdoor part, I think, gives me a chance to really think and clear my head. And sometimes amazing ideas will come to me while I'm out there, sometimes not.
mhm,
But in any case, it feels like I'm resetting, I'm getting a clear head. And then when I go inside, by the way, I'm doing this all offline, no social media, no digital, nothing, right?
mhm, mhm,
So I'm going unplugged into the closed space, and I'm forcing myself to stay there for like 3 hours. And when I do that, the productivity is pretty remarkable. It's not that maybe it's not dramatically different from what I was doing before, but before I was taking more breaks, I was being
mhm.
interrupted more, I was going on social media more, and I never got quite into the deep flow that I'm getting into now. So anyway, I think it's a great kind of method for people to try if they want to sort of jumpstart their creativity a little bit, particularly if you've got a project or something that's you're either in the midst of, or you're just starting, or you're thinking about. It's been on your back burner and you're wanting to work on it. I think this is a nice way to just sort of force
Mm.
yourself to go really deep into it right away.
Yeah. Well, I actually would push back for two reasons.
Yeah.
One, the word force always wakes up something in me because when we go to the formula for your question asking, I see is the entry that softens and the exit that softens,
Yeah. Right.
that makes the question sort of sit well in a
Right.
space.
Sure.
And so my experience with doing the experiment a couple of times
Yeah.
is that those 2 hours are this low pressure
Mm.
opportunity
Yeah.
to just marinate
Right.
with
Right.
whatever questions I'm going into.
Yeah. Yep.
And,
Yep.
and I think that sort of loose
Did you bring specific questions with you?
yeah, well, that's the thing that I'm trying to think about. It's like the broad question is sort of like, oh, here's this topic that I'm
Yeah.
thinking about. Like, here's this thing that I'm feeling like I want to
Yeah.
write about. I was thinking about, I'd read your guidelines and I was thinking to myself, like, well, what would I want to walk out of this with? What can I
Yeah.
make in 3 hours? Like,
Right.
so in a way, it's like I'm, making this loose architecting. And it
Yeah.
feels like there's this buildup of thoughts and inspirations that when you sit down at the desk allows a lot more to just flow out.
Mm-hmm.
I think the
Mm-hmm.
other thing that's interesting is the 3 hours, the 2 hours and 3 hours, because yeah, 2 hours is like a big commitment to like
Yeah.
just wander the hell around nature.
Yeah. Yep.
And 3 hours is a slightly uncomfortably long period of
It's a
time
lot. It's a lot.
to,
Yeah.
to
Well,
do work.
yeah. 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 I've said to people, you may need to adjust this because some people might not. This is the formula that works for me, but it might not be right for everyone. And then I started to think, especially like, think about maybe older people,
Mm.
maybe asking them to go and walk for 2 hours in nature, might be a little unrealistic, or even unhealthy, you know. So it's like I think people are going to have to adjust that
Mm.
formula. How did you find? Did you find in the end that the 2 hours seemed long?
Well, here's the thing. Like, this is the other, so that was in August.
Yeah.
And since then,
And
I've
where'd you do it, by
kept
the way?
well, this is the thing.
Okay.
August, my wife and I, for the last several years, rent out a tiny little condo
Ah,
pretty close to the beach in the Jersey Shore.
mhm.
And I can just like walk a block to the boardwalk.
Great.
And so going for a 2 hour walk on the beach, not the worst thing to do
No,
in the
no,
world.
no. I
Although,
do it a lot.
yeah,
And
so it's,
boardwalks, by
one,
the way, can I just say
sure,
boardwalks are great, especially if they're not too crowded. Especially if they're
sure.
like if you're going off season, which is something I do. I do that on the Jersey Shore.
Mm,
There's this area called Point Pleasant Beach that I go to,
yeah, I know Point Pleasant.
and
It's
they have
beautiful.
a famous boardwalk. It's Jenkinson's boardwalk. But if you go off season, the boardwalk is abandoned. I love that. I mean, I love walking on an abandoned boardwalk. There's something about it that speaks to me. But anyway, go
The,
ahead. I'm sorry.
well, no, the beach off season has got a beautiful melancholy that
Yeah, exactly.
I have always
Right,
enjoyed. But
right.
I found that walking for an hour away from my house on the beach and then an hour back was, it's not a big lift. Plus, the transition from walking to writing was very low. And
Mm,
I feel like as I've, we were just talking before we started about like, and I've thought this in my head. It's like, oh God, it's like I got to get on the Metro North,
mm,
and go to Tarrytown.
yeah,
And then I could, but then I'm basically spending like a day, I'm committing
yeah.
a day to
It's a commitment.
retreat to working on this writing,
It's a
which is
commitment.
also, I
Yeah,
think, the space and time that may be required for real
yeah,
creativity, which is what you're also asking and offering people is like, if you want to break through creativity, you might need to do things a little differently. But I
yeah.
don't think this is
And
something I can do every week. I
no,
certainly haven't been able to make it
probably
happen
not.
for the last
Yeah.
two
Although
months.
I will say this, people get really hung up sometimes on the time and the 2 hours. And I just want to say to them, sometimes document how much time you're spending in a day on social media. And I'll bet you
Fair.
it's going to be pretty close to 2 hours. So, if you think about it, or just think about the fact that we think nothing of watching a movie in the
Yeah.
last 2 hours, right? So it's all depends on how you look at it. Like 2 hours might seem like a lot, but it's not that much. And
Yeah.
so, especially for something that could have potentially have a big return.
Totally.
It's really not a lot, but it is hard for people to do, and especially when I have them paired up with the 3 hours in the cave, now it becomes a 5 hour commitment. So
Right.
that is serious. I mean, that means you've got to devote the better part of a day to it. And I know it's hard, and it's a challenge for some people, and some people are really busy. And but I do think even if you could only do it once every couple of weeks, if you could block off 5 hours, maybe you start really early in the morning and you go till 3 in the afternoon or 2 in the afternoon or something. But I think it's worth it because I think
Yeah.
it will get you in touch with something that you maybe haven't been in touch with,
That's
and it's important.
that's the thing that I think is really true about this process is that like the negative space to
Right,
just noodle,
right, right,
as it
right.
were, is
Yeah,
surprisingly effective. And so like I can definitely attest from my own experience that like not like just trying to sit down and write is a much harder proposition than walking away and thinking about what I want to write and then
right,
writing.
right,
Like,
right. Yeah. Did you find it hard to stay in when it got to sort of the cave part or the writing part? Did you find it hard to stay with it for 3 hours? Did you have the urge to walk away? And how did that all work?
yeah, well, I think this is another question about like the skill or the discipline of writing, which is to
Yeah,
say research versus writing and editing versus writing.
right.
And I think sort of like all of those things kind of take me or take one out of the process.
Yeah,
And I feel like the first time I did it, by 2 hours, I was like getting itchy. I think it is a muscle.
mm,
We talked about this when we were hanging out in person back in March that my cousin's company, Cave Day, literally provides a sort of a distraction free digital space for people to get some companionship to focus on their work. I think one of the
tell
things
me
that's
about that again because I don't remember that.
yeah, so
Cave Day.
they Cave Day. So like
That's
one of the things that
fantastic.
I find very
That's what it's
useful
called.
it's called
Cave
Cave
Day.
Day. Like you sign up
Wow.
and then you spend like maybe 5 minutes just like talking to three other people saying like, hey, here's what I want to work on today. And here's what I'm going to leave outside of the cave. And then you kind of work for 40, 45, 50 minutes. It's really up to the facilitator. They say here, hey, it's time for a break. Stretch, pee, back in 3 minutes. So I feel like I've
And
been tempted. I have
while this is going on, you're seeing the facilitator on.
Yeah,
on
you
your,
can have Zoom up on the other window. Some people call it body doubling, where there's like, okay, I will stay focused because I can see all these other people are staying focused.
yeah,
And so I've been tempted to pair the walk with a digital cave day so
that's
that I have
interesting.
the the support to stay focused for 3 hours. Because I find when I sign up for a cave, I can definitely, it's not a full 3 hours because the 3 hour cave includes, 2 4 minute breaks and 4 minutes of like checking in and checking out with people. And so I find that like that companionship
Yeah,
helps with the focus
interesting.
because it is a muscle. And you're 100% right that I think we've had such an assault on our ability to focus and be creative that it is very, very hard to
You've
do.
got to send me the link or
I will
whatever for that
100%.
because I am definitely going to look into this. This is gonna be in my book for sure because I think it's a little different from what I'm talking about because it's really about companionship, you know.
Yes.
And I'm actually talking more about solitude. That's more my focus. But but I think it's really interesting that if someone has trouble with solitude, if they have
Mm,
trouble doing the cave experience by themselves, this could be a great solution because
yeah. Because we're
they may
alone
just
together
need,
in a way.
yeah, exactly, right. And just the idea they may just need a little bit of, it's almost like a little bit of supervision, right? Just to make
Yes.
sure you're not screwing off, just to make sure you're actually working. And it's just enough supervision maybe to keep some people from drifting off or walking away, right?
Yeah.
And that's the big fear or the big challenge here is how do you keep yourself from walking away? I was saying to someone just recently that I think worse than walking away, what we do nowadays in the digital age is we go online. We don't
Yeah.
walk away. We don't actually leave our desk and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
We just walk away from what we're working on and go into the virtual world. We go into the online world, and that's the escape, right? That's the way we
Yeah.
escape. And we check emails, and we check the blogs, and we go through the politics of the day, and we go through the news, and we go through all that stuff. And that's how we walk away. That's how we walk
Mm.
away from our work, because all of that is an escape. It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying the news isn't valuable. I'm not saying we shouldn't be. I'm not saying social media doesn't have a role. I'm not saying all those things. They're good in a way, but they're also an escape. They're
Hmm.
also, and they're being used more and more as an escape by people. And I think people don't even realize they're doing it. It's a kind of a escape hatch that they don't even realize they're using.
Yeah.
And so anything that will keep us from doing that, and if it involves this cave day person, that's great.
I feel like it is a muscle that is atrophied for many
Yeah,
of us to have sustained focused attention. And so
right.
I think what I love about this process is that it allows a soft entry into that process.
Yeah, yeah,
And
I think so.
I'm inspired to try it. Now that I know that I don't, because I too like a good process to follow. And I
Right.
think that 2 hours has been like, I don't know if I can do it all. And so I love that, you're getting permission from the designer
Yeah,
himself
I
to
mean, you
say,
can try an
hey,
hour.
an
Now, the
hour,
only thing the only
45.
thing I would say is if you do it for an hour, you won't get quite as much benefit because there is a thing that happens. Thoreau used to walk around Walden Pond, right? Henry David Thoreau, and he said this great line. He said, "It takes me like a while, like 15 minutes or half an hour, just to leave the village behind."
Mm,
Okay, so what he's saying there is, you have the world that you're in and all the stuff that's in your head and all the online stuff and the stuff that's going on in your house and all that stuff, it's going to follow you into the woods and it's
yes.
going to stay with you for a certain amount of time. And it's going to take a while for that stuff to go away and for your brain to really clear and really be in nature and be fully immersed in nature. And I'm not sure how long that takes. So that's
Yeah.
why I try to get people to do 2 hours because it might take them a half an hour just to leave the village behind, and then
Yeah.
then they've only got a half hour left if they're doing a 1 hour walk. So I want people to do a substantial walk.
Hmm.
Let's say an hour and a half at least. Okay, if you can't do 2 hours, try to do an hour and a half, because then you have the time to get really detached, get your brain immersed, and start to get the juices flowing, and
Yeah.
and that's what you're trying to do.
So if folks who listen to this are excited to give the experiment a try, where can we send them and what else can we share about your work if there's anything else
Yeah.
you'd like people to?
So I would say there's a website that I put up. I recently did a New York Times article about the Burren and creativity. The Burren is the place in Ireland that I went to. So there's a website you can go to that I set up at the same time I was doing the New York Times article, and it's called Burren Creativity Journal, all one word. And Burren, I'll spell that for you. Burren is spelled Burren. Burren. It's sort of like the word baron, but with a
Hmm.
U. Burren Creativity Journal. And that will take you to this site that I set up after I came back from the burn. And within that site, you'll see, as soon as you go on there, you'll see the experiment. You'll see, for people interested in doing the experiment, click here.
Hmm.
And when you click on that, there's some instructions, but it's pretty basic. I mean, it's what we've been talking about. It's about going out into nature for a couple of hours and then going into a closed space for a couple of hours and then seeing what comes out of it.
Yeah.
And one thing to keep in mind is you want to go in with a goal, with a project or an idea, something in mind. Don't go in totally blank. Think beforehand, before you do the experiment, think about what you might want to work on and
Hmm.
what's important to you, and then take that with you when you go do the experiment.
Yeah. Who do you think shouldn't do this experiment? Like, who is this not for?
Well, there's some people that they just don't have anything. They don't have anything really that they want to think deeply about or work on. Maybe they're different type. There are definitely people that I can think of that I know would not take well to this experiment.
Hmm.
Sometimes they're overly practical. They're people that they're very conscious of their time. They don't want to waste any time. They're the kind of people who always want to be doing,
Hmm.
doing, 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 doing. And I think for people like that, this might be a challenge, too much of a challenge,
Mm.
because I think that they might get too restless. They might go a little crazy with the downtime, with the being in nature and not knowing exactly what I'm
Yeah.
doing here. So I think, yeah, that could people like that. This could be an issue.
But it sounds like anybody who wants to have some breakthrough creative output on
Yeah,
any kind of challenge,
yeah,
as I
yeah.
say, it's great to walk away from your problems as long as you walk back to them
Yeah, yeah,
at some
exactly.
point.
Right, right, right. Yeah, and by the way, when I define creative and creativity, I use a very broad definition. So this is not geared to artists or writers necessarily. Creativity to me, people in business need to use their creativity. Creativity is just about allowing your imagination to go to work on something and then trying to bring that to life in some way. That's what creativity is. It's like a two-part process. Part one is just allowing yourself to imagine, think of possibilities, think of new ways of doing things, and then just putting that into some kind of form, even if it's writing it up or creating an
Mm.
outline or creating a proposal, a business proposal. It could be all kinds of things like that. So that's what creativity is. So anyone who wants to take that approach, and that's who this is geared for.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm really grateful. I don't think I am very grateful that we made this time for this. I know we're at time. And is there anything we haven't talked about that we should talk about? I feel like we
I
covered
don't think so. I
the bases.
think we've covered it all. Yeah, I hope people will check out the site and think about doing the experiment and give it a try. It's a lot of fun. If nothing else, you come away with a different feeling about spending time in nature. I mean, that's what people
Yeah.
have been telling me too. That they never spent that much time walking around in their local park or whatever, and
Hmm.
they see it differently after they do it. They just really, it changes the way you look at something.
Yeah. I'll look for that next time.
So
So I will call scene. I just heard the beeps.